I'm sorry it's taking me so long
That's
to come
fine.
and talk to you, but
fine.
I had everything filled up, and then I did the
you-
3-part series with Glenn.
Well, you needed to talk to them first because they were all combatants.
Right.
Like Virgil said, "You damn right, they bombed the shit out of it."
Yeah. And I had to include that in there and put a little bleep in there, and I did that. And then I did the 3-part series with Glenn, and I would have gone to a 4th part, but I really had told all the story I could on the radio, and but I got a lot of comments on it.
Oh yeah,
I
I'm
really
sure.
got a lot of comments.
He's the most interesting person.
Oh, he really is.
And did he tell you that he still had the mouthpiece to that bugle?
Yep.
And I don't know, I've forgotten how he kept the mouthpiece, but he did have it.
Yeah, he told me that he had the mouthpiece and a few other things that he had. What I treasure is I've got you got a copy of the tape.
Yeah, I have a copy
of the whole conversation.
Yes, I've listened to part of it.
Yeah, well, it's something you listen to just a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
And I finished Abandoned Ship, and I got all the drowned sailors also. I'm just kind of fascinated by it. The whole war, I'm just fascinated with. Matter of fact, yesterday, I went and I had seen this movie before, but I guess I was so young I didn't really appreciate it. But I went and I found Midway yesterday.
Oh, that's
and I went and rented it, and what a tremendous movie
tremendous.
Because they took actual footage and blended it with Hollywood.
Yeah.
And oh boy, that was tremendous. All the stars that were in that movie.
I don't remember whether it was brought out in the movie, but the way that they determined that the Japanese force was coming to Midway was that they broadcast blind that Midway was without water.
Right.
Did they bring it out? Well, that's true.
They broadcast blind that Midway had a water a water purification thing was broken or something like that, or they broadcast that blind.
And the Japanese came back in code.
And said no, everything's fine.
Yeah.
Or something.
Well, what they didn't know what the code name for Midway was.
Right.
And they didn't know whether it was going to be Midway or something else. Right. And when they came back with the code and said Midway,
FA or A or something,
then they knew it was going to be Midway.
So in the movie, Hal Holbrook came up with the idea to do that. That was his character that came up with the idea to do that. But some of the scenes and all that.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah,
it really was. It really was.
Well, Doc, tell me, I've gotten bits and pieces just by talking to you over at Al's house and listening to Al, just bits and pieces of what your career was, what your involvement was in the war, obviously from the medical standpoint. But I haven't heard it yet in your words, so just sort of start.
Tom, I did not start out in the medical department of the Navy. I was 17, going on 18 years old in 1945 in May, when 2 of my friends and I enlisted in the Navy, volunteered for the Navy. And we were sent to the Great Lakes Naval Training Station up near Chicago, and 2 of us had musical talents, and so we were selected for the Blue Jacket Choir while we were at Great Lakes in boot camp. And while we were there, we also made a movie, a short, about a 30-minute short of the Blue Jacket Choir and the Great Lakes Orchestra and several vocal soloists and so forth. And one time I was sitting in a movie in Portland, Oregon, and all of a sudden the gates of Great Lakes comes up. I'd never seen the movie, and it was that movie. So that was the most interesting thing that occurred to me while I was in boot camp. While we were in boot camp, the atom bomb was dropped, and we were just about ready to leave to go overseas. And consequently, we were delayed in going overseas. We finished boot camp in August, and the bomb was dropped somewhere around the 1st of August, and we finished toward the end. And so we were delayed in going overseas, but eventually both of us went to Shoemaker, California, and were put on a ship. He was put on one ship, and I was put on the USS Admiral Benson. And we spent about 30 days, I spent about 30 days on that ship. Of interest, Travis Bryan Jr., and George Ferrari from Bryan, Texas were both on that ship. We did not know each other and did not find out about this until about 3 or 4 years ago. Travis was ship's company, I was a passenger, and George Ferrari was ship's company. The trip over was an interesting trip in that there was a typhoon in Okinawa, or off Okinawa, at the time we neared Okinawa in the last of September or the middle of September, I don't remember which, of 1945. And it was a severe, severe typhoon, which is called a hurricane here. And when we entered the harbor, Buckner Bay at Okinawa, there were over 100 ships that had been grounded or turned over on their side or sunk or whatever. And so this was a harrowing experience, even though it was not wartime. I was not in combat in World War II. I got there after the armistice had been signed, or Japan had surrendered, but we were some of the first troops into a little village called Wakanura, Japan. And Wakanura was a port city for a larger city about 20 miles away called Wakayama. And Wakayama had been devastated by the B-29 bombers that had flown in there prior to the end of the war. The only thing standing in this city of 100,000 plus people were the bank vaults. Everything else was gone. There was nothing standing at all. The little village of Wakanura was spared because it had no significance militarily to the Air Force or to the Army. And it was a resort city, and we spent probably about 6 or 8 months there in the harbor at Wakanura. And it was like being in a Japanese resort. The old hotels and everything were there, and it was really a lot of fun for us at the time. After we left Wakanura, we went to Kobe, Japan, and again, Kobe was a city of probably over 800 or 900,000 people, and the only things again standing were the bank vaults and the elevated railway, which was made out of cement. Everything else was completely flattened, and you just couldn't believe the devastation. And even though there was no atom bomb dropped, it still was complete, total devastation as far as the cities were concerned.
These were the scathing missions that happened.
Correct, correct.
Which actually killed more people than the
correct,
bomb did.
correct,
Add them all up.
correct.
Yeah.
We also, prior to the time we went to Wakanura, went to Sasebo, and then going into Wakanura past Nagasaki, and you could see from the ship, we were close enough in to see the destruction there, but to me it all looked the same, whether it was fire bombs or atom bombs. Except for the radiation, the destruction was total and complete, and nothing was standing. After being in Japan about 10 months or so, then we came back to the United States, and shortly thereafter I was discharged after about 15 months in the Navy. Then during the Korean War, I had just finished medical school in June of 1952, and again volunteered for the Navy and was sent to the U.S. Naval Hospital at Bethesda, which was the Navy's main hospital right outside of Washington, D.C., and that's where I spent another 14 months in an internship. That was interesting from the standpoint that when you're at Bethesda, you never knew who you were going to see next. And at one time, we had 4 5-star admirals in the hospital. Halsey, King, Halstead, and Nimitz were all there at one time. Admiral King lived on the 18th floor in the hospital, and the others were patients there. As a Lieutenant JG, we had to do physical examinations on anybody who came in, and again, I've done physical exams as a Lieutenant JG on 4 and 5, not 5-star admirals, 4-star admirals, and it was something that would cause some timidity, because here I was fresh in the Navy again and a low-ranking officer, and here you're doing a physical examination on a 4-star admiral, and that did cause some concern. But they were real nice people, and I had the privilege of doing a physical examination on Admiral Block, who was the commander of the Pacific prior to Admiral Kimmel, who was there during Pearl Harbor and who was court-martialed after Pearl Harbor. Block probably was more responsible for what went on at Pearl Harbor than Admiral Kimmel was, but they didn't do anything to Admiral Block. After Bethesda, I then served as a destroyer squadron medical officer with the destroyer fleet Atlantic, and I had 8 destroyers, one of which was the Sullivans, named after the 5 Sullivan boys who were killed during World War II. Juno, that's a cruiser Juno. Cruiser Juno.
The Indianapolis. It went down and there
correct.
Was a shark.
Correct.
Shark deal, right?
Correct.
I learned a lot about this.
So, well,
Yeah.
that's very true.
Yeah. Yeah.
There were 7 other destroyers, and I was assigned to the whole squadron and could ride on any of the destroyers I wanted to. And most of the time I rode on a destroyer named the Haley or the Hickox or the USS Miller. These were 2100 class destroyers with one single gun and a turret. There were 3 5-inch guns on them, and then multiple anti-aircraft guns of smaller caliber. During the Korean conflict, I served my entire time in the Atlantic, so again, I was a non-combatant, but I guess we could have been assigned.
Dumb question, but what were those destroyers doing in the Atlantic during the Korean conflict?
Well, we were practicing primarily anti-submarine warfare and submarine detection, so we worked with an aircraft carrier, what they call a jeep carrier, which was a small carrier, and just recently the USS Cabot, which was a jeep carrier, has been sold down in Brownsville for $185,000 for scrap. And a group was trying to preserve it, you know, as a memorial to all the jeep carriers in the Atlantic. But we worked with the USS Block Island. And an interesting thing that did occur while I was with the destroyer fleet was that the USS, cut it off a minute. The USS Bennington, which was a turbine-powered, not nuclear-powered carrier prior to the canted deck carriers, had hydraulic catapults on it, and they were 500 miles off the coast of Rhode Island, and they were launching jets that morning, and one of the catapults had a leak in it, and the hydraulic fluid vaporized and went into the ventilation system of the ship and primarily into the officer's wardroom. And when they launched one of the jets, a spark ignited that vaporized hydraulic fluid, and it exploded in the wardroom and killed about 110 people, most of them being officers, killed both doctors on that carrier at that time. So I was transferred back to the Naval Hospital at Newport, Rhode Island when that occurred, and we got probably 300 to 400 severely burned people within about a 6-hour period of time at that hospital, and it was just totally overwhelming to us. I mean, it's something that you just can't imagine trying to take care of that many severely burned people at one time. They took all the regular patients out of the hospital and farmed them out into local hospitals, and we converted the entire hospital into a burn center. We had people come from Harvard, from Johns Hopkins, and from everywhere, you know, civilian type doctors come up there to help us with all those burn people. But that was a time that was nearly like warfare, even though I was not in combat.
That was,
and then
from a
after,
medical standpoint, that was all the
right,
combat you wanted to see right there.
After that, the rest of my career was fairly benign, and I served out in the Atlantic aboard destroyers and got out and stayed in the reserve for about 10 years and finally got out of the reserve.
So when did you get off of active duty? What year was that again?
1954, 54. In August of 54.
So
I don't remember when the war in Korea ended. It ended some...
52?
No, it was still going in 52 and 3, but I don't remember when it ended, but somewhere long in there it did end.
Right, yeah. Now, take me back to the start when you went to Japan soon after the war was over. What was the mission of what was y'all's mission there then?
Well, at that time they had a point system for returning people who had been overseas. Okay. You got points for the number of months that you had been overseas. You got points for the number of battles you'd fought. You got points for your age, whether you were married. So when they compiled these points, then these people automatically had a transfer back to the United States. Well, there were still hundreds of ships in the Pacific, and all of a sudden all these personnel were being taken off these ships, and so we were replacements for the people who were coming back who had served, during a long period of time during the war. So we were primarily replacements. I ended up in the engine room of an LST that had been converted to a refrigerator ship, and there were two 1,200 horsepower diesels in an area probably measured 20 by 20, or maybe a little larger than that. And we wore no sound protection of any kind. And you'd stay down there 4 hours and you'd come out and you couldn't hear a thing for the next 8 hours. These engines were huge, and it was a lot of fun being there, but I probably have suffered from hearing loss since then.
But now you were not a doctor at this time when you went there.
I was only 18 years old.
You were 18
and
years old.
I was a machinist mate.
Okay.
And worked on the diesel engines.
Right.
No, I was not a physician.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you came back after that, and then that's when
Came
you went
back
to school.
and went to pre-medicine immediately after I got out of the Navy. And
Where'd you do that?
I went to pre-medicine at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee. It's a little Baptist denominational college. Finished 3 years of pre-med there, then was admitted to medical school and graduated when I was 26 years old from the University of Tennessee Medical School, and then went into the Navy immediately again as a Lieutenant JG. I ended up in the reserve as a lieutenant commander.
And that's when you went pretty much straight from University of Tennessee to Washington?
Directly.
To Bethesda?
Yes.
And you were there about 14 months?
14 months.
And
Shirley Temple was a patient at the time I was there and had a cesarean section, and the man who was head of the Department of Obstetrics there did the cesarean section. Shirley had a lot of complications, no fault of his, and nearly died from a pulmonary embolus and 2 or 3 other complications. Shirley's husband was Commander Black, who was stationed at the main Navy building in downtown Washington, and that's how she happened to come to the Naval Hospital. We saw people from the King of Siam literally on up and down. As I told you about the 5-star admirals, we had Senator Joseph McCarthy there at the time that I was an intern, and I got to do a partial physical examination on him. So the people that you saw, you stood in complete awe, because these are people who are in the newspapers every day. And it was not that far after World War II that these admirals were still fairly spry as far as their physical conditions were concerned.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of interesting people there. The Navy utilized Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, and George Washington University as their consultants, and the first open heart surgery I ever saw was at Bethesda, and instead of having electronic monitors like they have in the operating rooms now, they had an old EKG with a long cable running out in the hall, and that EKG ran continuously during this surgery, and there was probably 1.5 miles of paper that ran out of that EKG during that surgical operation, but there were no monitors at all. And at this time, surgery on the heart was, just beginning, so that was something that I was very privileged to see some of the first that occurred, and there was a Dr. Charles Huffnagel, and there is a valve now that's used to replace valves in the heart called the Huffnagel valve, and I was privileged to have worked with him in surgery at Bethesda.
Wow.
It was an interesting time.
Wow. So how did, okay, after you got out of the reserves then, where'd you continue your medical practice?
Okay.
How did you get here?
My brother, O.C. Cooper, Dr. O.C. Cooper, was stationed.
O.C. is your brother?
Yeah, was stationed at the Bryan Air Force Base. So he decided to stay to Bryan. I came to Bryan and looked at it, and this was in the middle of a drought, and I said, my goodness, who would ever live in that godforsaken country? So I went to Portland, Oregon, and practiced for a year, and it rained 365 days out there. So I decided that I'd come back to this godforsaken country, and it's now God's country.
So you came here just to check things out because your brother was here.
Right.
Didn't like it.
No.
Went to Portland. Didn't like that.
Man, O.C. stayed here.
Right.
After the Air Force, and so I called him one night and told him, I said, man, is there still an opening there? And he said, come on back, and that's how I got here.
My goodness gracious. So now he's an older brother, right?
He's 5 years older than I am,
5 years
yes.
older.
Yes. Cut it off, man.
Okay, sure, yeah, go ahead. I'm just reading right up there. You and O.C. are sons of Baptist minister?
Correct.
Is that right? So where did you grow up? Did I get that? I mean,
well,
where's your home?
We've lived in Texas longer than we've lived anywhere else, but we both went to the University of Tennessee Medical School, and I suppose that we could consider Greenfield, Tennessee, which was a little town in western Tennessee about 100 miles from Memphis, as our beginnings. But after being in the freshman class in high school in Greenfield, my father moved to Cairo, Illinois, and I spent the rest of my high school days in Cairo, with the exception of about 6 months, and then I came back to Greenfield. So we moved all over. Our father eventually moved to Hempstead as pastor of the First Baptist Church down there after both of us moved here. And then when he retired, he moved to Bryan and was he repaired old clocks in his retirement.
What was his name? O.C.
Senior.
O.C. Senior.
Yeah. O.C. won't tell his real name. It's Oliver Columbus.
Why won't he tell that?
He always said he was Oliver Charles.
Now you have a general practice in aviation medicine. Talk
Correct.
about the aviation medicine part of that. What is that?
Well, I have been in the business of doing physicals for the Federal Aviation Administration. This will be the 40th year, and I'm what's known as a senior aviation medical examiner. I do physicals first class, second class, and third class. First class is what all airline captains and co-pilots have, on down to third class, which private pilots or people who fly just for pleasure and not for hire have. I do a lot of airline physicals. As a matter of fact, I had 2 captains from Continental today, and we do physicals for any airline person who wants to come in. The airlines have their own medical departments, but the FAA requires them to go to a non-airline connected physician for their physical exams. The airline captains have to have an exam every 6 months and an EKG every year after their 40th year. A private pilot or not for hire pilot has to have a physical every 2 to 3 years depending upon their age. But I do a lot of airline work and have a lot of people who come as far away as Denver. Once they come to you, they just keep coming back because they like to keep their records in the same place. An interesting note, I told you about going to all the manned Apollo launches, 7 through 17, and through a Dr. J.R. Maxfield in Dallas, I became close friends with Dr. Werner von Braun and did an FAA physical on him before he died back many, many years ago, which again was a privilege for me.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Now you've gotten, because of this, you've gotten very close to people in the space program, obviously. You were telling me out in the hall. Talk a little more about that on the stage.
Well, Jack Swigert, who flew Apollo 13 as the replacement astronaut, he and I became very close friends, and we became friends. I met him in Houston at a splashdown party for Apollo 12, I believe, and Jack flew Apollo 13. It was Apollo 12 or 12, I think it was, that I met Jack, the splashdown party. Jack's father was an ophthalmologist in Denver, and so at this splashdown party, Jack's father was there, and I met him, and he said, "Oh, would you like to meet my son?" I said, "Well, who is your son?" He said, "Jack Swigert." Well, Jack at that time had not been assigned to any flight as far as the Apollo program was concerned. When Apollo 13 was getting ready to fly, Ken Mattingly, who was the command module pilot, was exposed to German measles, and as far as the doctors knew, did not have an immunity to measles, so they were afraid to let him fly Apollo 13 because he was going to be gone 8 days, and if you're going to come down with measles, you're going to come down within 7 to 14 days, and he would have come down with the measles probably about the time of re-entry, which is a very, very critical time.
Yeah.
So they bumped Ken Mattingly, put Jack Swigert in his place as command module pilot. Then on the way to the moon, the service module blew up and disabled disabled the.
You said Mattingly because I believe the movie depicted that as Alan Shepard was the one who was exposed to the measles.
It was not Alan Shepard. It was Ken Mattingly.
Maybe the movie made it a little sexier. Wanted it to I think the movie said that
Shepard flew Apollo 14 as the commander.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Jack replaced Mattingly and flew the command module, and the famous words, "Houston, we have a problem," was Jack Swigert. Well, after I met Jack and he and I became friends, he was a big racing fan also, and since I was chief physician at Texas World Speedway and also went to Indianapolis as a close friend of Wally Dallenbach, Jack and I were down in the pits up at Indianapolis, and there was one funny thing in the movie. Fred Hayes became super ill before re-entry, running 102, 103 temperature with an acute prostatitis. He made the comment in the movie to Jim Lovell. Jack was single and a playboy. He made the comment to Commander Jim Lovell, who also I've met and know but not very well, that God, Jim, do you think that Jack has gotten something and given it to me in this urinal tube here? So that was very real, and that probably did happen. The movie was very, very realistic.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, it's still one of my favorite movies.
It was very finely done and depicted very well, I think, what went on.
Yeah.
Because after Jack got back, listening to him, it all sounded like he was telling the story over again.
Right.
Jack became, or was elected to Congress from somewhere in Colorado, and very shortly after that developed cancer of the nasopharynx and died.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. So, wow. I mean, your life has been very, very blessed with lots of experiences.
I have lived an exciting life and enjoyed every minute of it, and just hope that I can continue. But I don't want to go back to World War II or Korea again, even though I was non-combatant.
Yeah.
And
now
I
you're
really...
married to Connie?
Connie Adams Cooper,
and,
yes.
And you all have one son?
Two children.
Who are they?
Abby Cooper and Jeffrey Cooper.
And what does Abby do?
Abby is probably going to go to medical school. She's in the Hammond-Oliver program here in the school district. And Jeffrey is probably going into radio television production or something concerned with radio television.
Yeah.
Really loves it.
Yeah.
And so I want you to give him a boost.
Oh, well, I will. As a matter of fact, I'll come back and I'll do one of these shows on him because of the thing that they did this summer. He wants to get in the production end of it. He's the technical part of it, right?
I'm not sure that he knows exactly what he wants to do right now, but certainly something concerned.
Does he have engineering tendencies?
Not really, not really. Even though I have a lot of engineering tendencies, and I hope he's inherited some of them.
But he likes to produce
correct,
things. He
correct.
can produce commercials and stuff
Correct.
like that and all that. Well, there's places for him, probably more in TV than radio. Because radio doesn't have the budget sometimes that TV does, but TV is always looking for young,
I have
producers and stuff like that.
Another son, Tom, who is by a former marriage, and he is a motion picture cameraman and does a lot of TV stuff, and was privileged to work on the last Gunsmoke show as a cameraman.
I'll be darned.
His name is Brown Cooper, and he lives in Fort Worth.
Brown Cooper.
Yes.
So those are your 3 children?
No, I have 6 children. Had 4 by my former marriage and 2 by this marriage.
I see.
The others are grown.
Yeah. So you still have a thriving practice, and
Tom, I do no hospital work at all. All I do is office work. And I did not mention that I'm a 5,000-hour certified flight instructor instrument. I don't fly anymore, but that attracts a lot of these pilots here for physical exams, because they can relate to a pilot, and a pilot who is a physician can appreciate the problems that pilots have. And after all, when they come in here for a physical, if they don't pass, this is their livelihood. And I have a great responsibility, number one, not to let them fly if they do have physical problems, but on the other hand, I have a responsibility to them to try to keep them flying, and if they do have physical problems, to try to help them correct those problems so they can continue to fly. And this has been an enjoyable thing for me in working with them on this. But they do appreciate the fact that I understand their side of the game.
Yeah. When I was over there seeing you, and you looked at my head and told me exactly what I had, right after that, I guess Al and I went inside the house or something right after that, and Al looked at me and he said, whatever he said you had. Because he said that guy out there is one of probably the top 2 diagnostic doctors,
diagnosticians.
diagnosticians in the world.
Well, I'd like to claim that, but I doubt that. I doubt that.
It comes from experience, right?
It comes from experience.
Yeah.
In telling you about the senior aviation medical examiners, I'm one of the most senior aviation medical examiners in the whole United States. There are probably no more than 1,500 senior examiners in the whole United States, and I have the privilege of being one of them.
I'll be darned.
Which I do.
You're not all that senior. How old are you?
73.
Really?
I was 73 August 30.
Well, you could pass for 63.
Well, the motor doesn't run that fast anymore.
Well, this is great. I've been looking forward to visiting with you because you're just such a outgoing and nice gentleman, and just forthright. And,
not much, experience in combat like those other guys have had, but after all, I was nearly a child when I went in.
Yeah.
I was barely 18. Well, I was 17 when I actually went in.
Yeah.
And only 18 then. Shortly thereafter, I went in May, and in August I was 18.
Right.
1945.
Right. Great.
Okay.